63 applicants stood in the glass lobby of the Nexara building. Broad, polished, every one of them dressed in black. Then the door turned and Dominic Shaw walked in. Wrinkled shirt, Von Gimp. Behind him a 6-year-old girl clutching a white stuffed rabbit. The laughter came immediately. Someone said it looked like a preschool drop-off. Dominic didn't turn around. He set his daughter down, smoothed her hair once, and walked onto the floor. 30 seconds later, Logan Cross, 253 pounds of regional MMA champion, was face down on the mat. Nobody laughed after that, not even Giselle Park, who had stepped close enough to see everything. Her heart moving faster than she was prepared to admit. The man they mocked would become the only one, standing between her and everything. She was about to lose. That Monday morning had started like any other at the Nexara building. 42 floors of blue glass rising above the east side of the city. Home to one of the most quietly powerful security technology firms on the eastern seaboard. But the first floor that day had been converted into something else entirely. 63 candidates filled the lobby in 2 long rows. Each one carefully selected. Each one arriving with the particular posture of a man who believed he was the obvious answer to the question being asked. Former police officers, professional fighters, ex-military contractors, men who had spent years being paid to look dangerous and had become very good at it. The air smelled like ambition and shoe polish. Then the revolving door turned and Dominic Shaw walked in. Hunter Voss crossed the lobby before the registration clerk could speak. He was 38 years old, thick through the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who believed he had already won a competition that hadn't finished. As acting head of security for Nexara Group, Hunter had reasons to be unsettled by today's tryout, and he had chosen to let that unease come out as cruelty. He stopped directly in front of Dominic, close enough to establish the size difference. This isn't a daycare, friend. The preschool entrance is in the basement. More laughter from the chairs. Logan Cross, sitting in the front row with his arms crossed and one leg stretched out like he owned the floor, gave a slow nod. Logan was 253 pounds of professional MMA fighter who had won 3 regional championships in the last 4 years. He was also the most obvious choice for this position, and he knew it. He had been enjoying the morning. Dominic looked at Hunter directly. His voice carried no heat. I have an appointment at 9 o'clock. My name is on your list. Hunter checked the tablet. Something moved across his face, a brief tightening that he covered quickly. The name Dominic Shaw sat at the top of the candidate roster. Added late Sunday afternoon. Added personally by Giselle Park, CEO of Nexara Group. Hunter tapped the screen and handed the tablet back to the clerk without explanation. He gestured toward the main hall with a short movement of his chin. Luna was escorted to a small waiting area near the reception desk, where a junior staff member had set up coloring books and a low table. She sat down, placed Pepper on the chair beside her, opened to a blank page, and began to draw without a word. Dominic walked into the main hall. The first round was not about strength. It was about judgment. Each candidate was given 3 minutes at a standing desk. 1 interviewer, a list of situational questions. No time to rehearse. The men ahead of Dominic arrived with laminated credentials, printed service records, framed photographs of themselves with notable clients. One man had brought a folder 12 pages thick. 2 of them opened with the phrase, "I've been doing this for 15 years." Dominic came to the desk with nothing in his hands. The interviewer looked up. "Your CV." Dominic set a single sheet of white paper on the desk. On it was a phone number and 1 line of text. "Call this number if you need verification." The interviewer stuttered it. Hunter Voss, standing nearby with his arms folded, let out a short breath through his nose. The sound a person makes when they've decided to be patient in a theatrical way. "You're serious?" Hunter said. "Very," Dominic said. The second part of the first round was a response assessment. Each candidate watched a 90-second video of a simulated threat environment, a crowded event space, multiple actors moving through the frame, a principal figure in the foreground, and had 30 seconds to identify danger points and propose a response protocol. Logan Cross watched the video, paused 2 seconds, then identified 4 of the 6 marked threat positions. He spoke clearly and with authority. The room gave him quiet approval. Dominic watched the video once. He stood with his arms at his sides and said, 6 marked positions. 2 unmarked. The camera dead zone behind column 3 on the left side gives an unobserved approach angle of approximately 4 feet. And the man in the green jacket has shifted his hand position 3 times since the video began. He's carrying something he hasn't decided to use yet. The room was quiet for 2 seconds. Hunter said, "Lucky guess." Dominic said nothing. He returned to his seat. Upstairs on the 38th floor, Giselle Park was watching the feed from the assessment room on the monitor above her desk. She sat in a straight-back chair with a notepad on her knee that she had not written on in the last 20 minutes. Her assistant, Madison Cole, stood near the door. "He doesn't look like the usual type," Madison said carefully. "No," Giselle said. "He doesn't." 3 weeks earlier, an unmarked envelope had arrived on Giselle's desk. Inside was a 12-page document, a detailed summary of one Dominic Shaw, service record, skill assessment, personal profile, no sender name, no return address. At the bottom of the last page, a single typed sentence. "She will need him." Giselle had run the sender's number. She had not yet received a name in return. On the monitor, Dominic sat in his chair with the same expression he'd had since walking in. Not bored, not performing patience, simply present. Giselle tapped her pen once against the notepad. Then she set it down. When the bracket for the physical round was posted on the board in the main hall, the room read it with the focused attention of men who understood what it meant. Most matchups were reasonably balanced. One was not. Hunter Voss had scheduled Dominic Shaw against Logan Cross. It was not an accident. Hunter had arranged the bracket himself that morning, and he had placed the matchup with a particular satisfaction of a man who believed he was solving a problem. If Dominic Shaw, this quiet, unpedigreed single father, anomaly who had appeared out of nowhere on the CEO's personal list, could be removed cleanly in the first round of the physical assessment, then the whole matter could be resolved before it became inconvenient. Logan Cross read the bracket and smiled. Not a cruel smile. Logan was not cruel by nature. He simply did not see it as a contest. The other candidates drifted toward the outer ring of the mat area. A few pulled out phones. The mood in the room had become something between entertainment and foreplay. They were going to watch the big man erase the puzzle. And then the day would make sense again. Upstairs, Madison leaned close to the monitor and said quietly, "Giselle, they've put him against Cross." Giselle was already standing. She straightened her jacket and walked to the door. "You're going down?" Madison asked. "The screen is too small," Giselle said, and stepped into the corridor. She arrived at the entrance to the training floor without announcement. No advance notice, no escort beyond Madison, who followed 3 steps behind and said nothing. The moment Giselle appeared in the doorway, the energy in the room changed. The ambient tension of men competing with each other collapsed into a different kind of attention. Spines straightened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. "Ms. Park, there's no need to continue," she said, looking past him toward the mat. She did not look at Logan Cross. She had already assessed Logan. He was what he appeared to be: powerful, experienced, and completely legible. She looked at Dominic. He was crouching near the edge of the mat, readying the lace on his left shoe. He was not looking at Logan. He was not looking at the crowd. He was not looking at her. In the 12 years since, Giselle Park had become the youngest CEO in Nexara's history. She had sat across from hundreds of people who were trying very hard to make an impression on her. Dominic Shaw was the first person in recent memory who appeared to have no idea she was worth impressing, or had simply decided it was irrelevant. That single fact held her attention more than anything else she had seen all morning. Logan Cross rolled his neck, stepped onto the mat, and looked down at Dominic with something approaching generosity. "You sure you don't want to give your spot to the next guy?" A low wave of laughter moved through the room. Dominic finished tying his lace. He stood up. He did not respond to Logan. He did not look at the crowd. He stepped onto the mat and turned to face the center of it with the calm of a man who had already decided what was about to happen and found the decision unremarkable. In the reception area down the hall, Luna had stopped coloring. She was looking through the narrow window in the wall, watching without climbing from her chair. The young staff member beside her glanced between the girl and the mat. "Is your dad strong?" the woman asked. Luna held Pepper a little tighter. "He doesn't lose," she said. "But he never says that himself." The referee raised his hand. The room held its breath. The timer started. Logan Cross came forward immediately. No hesitation. No warm-up fainting. He had ended 4 matches already that morning. All within 40 seconds. All with the same sequence. Close the distance. Establish grip. Control weight. It had worked perfectly every time. He applied it now with the confidence of a man repeating a proven equation. Dominic moved back, not scrambling one precise step, shifting his weight to the outside edge of his left foot in a way that redirected Logan's approach angle by approximately 6 degrees. It was barely visible. It was also the reason Logan's grip closed on air instead of shoulder. The room didn't understand what had happened. Logan recovered and came again. By the 9th second, Giselle had stopped breathing at her normal rhythm. She was watching Dominic's eyes. They were not tracking Logan's hands or feet the way a fighter's eyes usually tracked in reactive focus, following motion. They were still. He was reading something deeper, some sequence of information that lived below the level of individual movement. Logan attacked again. A 3rd time. Each time, Dominic gave him something a fraction of an opening, a half step of apparent vulnerability. She was watching Dominic's eyes. They were not tracking Logan's hands or feet the way a fighter's eyes usually tracked in reactive focus, following motion. They were still. He was reading something deeper, some sequence of information that lived below the level of individual movement. Logan attacked again. A 3rd time. Each time, Dominic gave him something a fraction of an opening, a half step of apparent vulnerability. And each time, the follow-through found nothing there. Giselle's right hand found the doorframe at some point without her noticing. At the 17th second, Dominic's eyes changed. A minor contraction, barely perceptible. He had seen what he needed to see. He had spent 16 seconds not fighting Logan Cross. He had spent 16 seconds learning him. At the 18th second, Dominic stepped in instead of back. What followed happened too quickly for most of the room to track cleanly. One arm controlled Logan's elbow at the joint. The other made a small, decisive adjustment to his center of gravity. Not a throw in the traditional sense, but a redirection so precise that Logan's own momentum became the mechanism of his descent. The technique was not MMA. It was not boxing. It was not anything the room could comfortably name. Logan Cross, 253 pounds. 3 regional titles, 4 straight wins that morning. Hit the mat face down and did not move. Total time, 27 seconds. No one spoke. Dominic released his hold, stepped back, and stood upright. His breathing was unchanged. He turned his hands over briefly. A mechanical check, nothing more, and stepped off the mat. Hunter Voss was holding a sheet of paper. He did not seem aware that it had fallen from his hand until it made a small sound. Against the floor, the phones that had been raised to capture what their owners had assumed would be a short, decisive humiliation were still recording. No one had thought to stop them. Luna appeared at the doorway, having slid from her chair the moment she heard silence instead of noise. She crossed the floor to Dominic with the focused urgency of a 6-year-old on a mission. "Dad, are you done?" Dominic crouched down to her level. He looked at her face for a moment with the careful attention he gave to everything. "All done," he said. "Should we go find you some orange juice?" Luna considered this seriously. "With ice?" "With ice," he said. He stood, took her hand, and walked toward the hall exit. Behind him, Logan Cross was being helped to his feet by 2 other candidates who were doing their best to look as though they had expected this outcome. Giselle Park stood at the door. Her hand dropped from the frame. She turned and walked back toward the elevator without a word. Madison fell into step beside her, and for the length of the corridor. Neither of them said anything. Then Madison said, very quietly. His breathing didn't change. "I know." Giselle said. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. She stepped in. And somewhere between the ground floor and the 38th, she acknowledged to herself as a private and purely operational observation that she had not watched a single other person in that room for the last 7 minutes. She called him up before the bracket finished. The other 62 candidates were still waiting in the main hall when Madison appeared at the door and asked Dominic Shaw to follow her. A few of them exchanged looks. Hunter Voss straightened his jacket and opened his mouth. But Madison had already turned toward the elevator. And Dominic was following. And Luna was beside him with Pepper tucked under her arm. And none of it had been submitted for approval. The 38th floor was quiet in the way that expensive buildings were quiet. Not silent, but deliberately undisturbed. Giselle's office occupied the northeast corner with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave the city back in clean rectangular sections. Books were organized by spine color. Her desk held exactly 3 items: a monitor, a notepad, and a glass of water. Nothing decorative. Nothing personal. Luna stepped inside, stopped, and looked around with the evaluative focus of a child who took environment seriously. "It's nice in here," she said, "but there aren't any plants." Giselle, who had been watching Dominic from behind her desk, looked at the girl. A beat passed. "I know," she said. Then she looked back at Dominic and the conversation about plants ended, though something about it stayed in the room. She slid a folder across the desk. "Sit down." He Saturday. Luna settled into the chair beside him, opened a small notebook from her coat pocket, and began drawing without being asked to. Giselle asked about the technique on the mat. He said it came from specific training in specific environments. He did not elaborate. She asked about his service record. He said it was in the folder she'd already reviewed. She asked who had sent her the 12-page document with his name on it. He looked at the folder on her desk. For 2 seconds, something moved behind his eyes. A recognition. A calculation. And then a deliberate settling. "I don't know," he said. She watched him. He was telling the truth. That was the part that bothered her most. "What salary are you asking?" She said finally. He gave her a number. It was reasonable, not suspiciously low, not inflated. It was the number of someone who had thought about what the work was worth rather than what the market would bear. She signed the contract without renegotiating. Downstairs, Hunter Voss received the news on his phone. He stood in the corridor outside the main hall, looked at the screen for a long moment, and then called a number that did not appear in Nexara's company directory. The call lasted 40 seconds. Afterward, he put his phone in his pocket, smoothed the front of his jacket, and went back inside to conclude the rest of the tryout as though nothing had happened. The first 7 days, Dominic worked like a shadow. He stayed exactly 1 step behind Giselle, not 2, not beside her. 1 step. The positioning was precise enough that Giselle noticed it on day 2 and said nothing because there was nothing to say about it. It was correct. It was how it should be done. He knew which doors were on delayed hinges before he reached them. He read meeting rooms before she entered them. Not conspicuously. Just a half-second pause at the threshold. Eyes moving once across the space. He knew when someone in a room was carrying tension before the conversation revealed it. In 7 years of running Nexara, Giselle had never had a security detail that she forgot was there because it simply functioned so naturally. She had spent those years finding ways to move around her guards. She did not find herself doing that now. She also noticed that he did not look at her the way people usually looked at her. The particular voltage that occurred when someone was aware they were standing near a CEO. That low-grade performance energy. The slight overpositioning of the body toward power was absent in him. He was not positioned toward her because she was important. He was positioned toward her because she was his responsibility. The distinction was so unfamiliar that it took her 3 days to name it. On the 5th day, the daycare called at noon. Luna's usual afternoon sitter had a family emergency and could not take her. Dominic came to Giselle's office door and spoke briefly to Madison. Then Madison came in and told Giselle what had happened, framing it as a logistical complication that required his absence for the afternoon. Giselle said, "Bring her here." Madison paused. Giselle had already turned back to her screen. Luna arrived 45 minutes later with her backpack and her coloring kit. She said hello to Giselle, put Pepper on the corner of the waiting room couch, and sat down with her supplies, and worked quietly for the entirety of the afternoon without interruption. At 4:30, she walked to Giselle's open office door and held out a folded piece of paper. Giselle opened it. It was a drawing in crayon, 3 figures in front of a house. One tall figure with dark lines for a jacket. One figure with long hair and a grey dress. One small figure holding something white and round, which was presumably Pepper. In front of the house, there was a tree with green leaves and what appeared to be apples or possibly ornaments. The sky was yellow. Giselle looked at it for a long time. She folded it carefully and opened the top left drawer of her desk and placed it inside. She did not put it in the recycling bin under the desk, which is where paper without operational relevance went. That evening, Giselle received an email from an anonymous address. The message was 9 words. "You're being sold and you don't know it. Yet." Attached was a screenshot of a clause from a contract she had signed 6 months earlier. A merger framework. Agreement with Vantage Tech led by Isaac Crane. The clause had a small section marker at the bottom. Section 9. She called her legal team. Her primary contract attorney did not pick up. His assistant called back 40 minutes later with an explanation that felt carefully constructed. Giselle sat at her desk after the call and looked at the framed mission statement on the wall across from her without seeing it. Dominic was standing near the window. He had been there since she finished the call. She said, "Do you know anything about this?" He said, "Not enough yet, but I'm looking."